Hello, welcome again to the Innovative Learning Environment and Student Experience Scoping Study. This video is an update on our progress to date with a specific focus on Workshop 2 findings. The ILESE Scoping Study has three driving questions. Where has existing research led us? What is the critical research that must be done? And how should such research be designed? In Workshop 1, we focus primarily on the first question, gathering the citations of research we currently use. We also use the discussions between team members to feedback some initial ideas about what educators, academics, and industry feel are the research gaps in their sector. In Workshop 2, we aim to gather more concrete evidence on Question 2, what gaps in research must be addressed? Having used the Workshop 1 discussions to identify 20 research gaps that exist, the aim of Workshop 2 was to begin ranking these gaps to determine priority areas for future research. It is this ranking of gaps that will be the focus of today's video. This is the overall ranking based on the full data set. Evaluation of learning environments, the design of ILESE, and their impact on student engagement remain a priority for participants, as identified across both workshops. Affective learning outcomes, sometimes referred to as 21st century learning skills, and health and well-being rounded out the top 5. It is important to note that we created a scaled frequency for this analysis so that each sector, academe, education, and industry, had equal say in determining the priorities on this list. In this analysis, it was evident that there are some different priorities for each sector. Often 2 sectors ranked a gap more highly than the third. We also explored how much the frequencies ranged, shown on the right-hand side of the list. This showed greater consensus on gaps such as affective learning outcomes and health and well-being, and greater differences between how the sectors ranked issues such as student engagement. Consequently, we explored the top 5 priorities for each sector separately to see where differences lie. Academics had equal frequencies for 3rd and 5th place on their list. While many of their top 5 are the same as the overall list, they also prioritised inclusiveness and teaching. They were the only sector to include teaching in their top 5, and the only sector to not include student engagement. Education had the most representation of all the sectors in the second workshop, and a much wider distribution of frequencies across individuals' top 5 than the other sectors. Education showed some differences in their priority list compared to the overall list, with academic learning outcomes and inclusiveness featuring in their sector list. They more frequently discussed the need for a study that links ILEs to academic learning outcomes to provide evidence for the increased investment in ILE builds. Both inclusiveness and health and well-being made it into their top 5, with their reasoning showing they are interested in ensuring ILEs cater for a diverse range of students. Industry was the only sector to prioritise hybrid learning environments. However, there was greater consistency between the industry responses and the overall list in terms of what they rank as their top 5. In addition to the sectors, we also explored priority areas through geographical analysis. The geographies analysis shows a high degree of consistency with the sector analysis. The 4 main priorities, affective learning outcomes, design of ILE spaces, evaluation of learning environments, and impact on student engagement, are 4 of the top 5 overall priorities. Health and well-being, the gap that rounds out the sector analysis, was a priority for over half of the regions in the scoping study. 6 out of the 20 gaps were not cited by any region in this activity, helping us to narrow the scope of our future research. Outside of the gaps presented here, most other gaps were only cited by between 1 and 3 regions, showing that there may be some need for small localised projects in a few regions. So do we have consensus? The short answer is yes. We never expected to get the same top 5 ranking across each of the sectors and all geographical regions, but we have come close. We have multiple items that consistently rate high, and the rankings point to a need to focus on the complex overlap between student well-being, learning outcomes, and the evaluation of ILEs. However, it is valuable to know where there are differences between sectors. We will continue to explore this as we move forward to refine our focus. Importantly, we feel there's a logical link between these diversities. For example, there's overlap between health and well-being and inclusiveness gaps, and it will be the role of the roundtables to explore these links to negotiate a coherent focus for the major research project we are developing. To revisit our project overview, we are moving towards the end of stage 2. We have completed the initial ideas generation through our first round of analysis and begun to refine and rank these ideas through workshop 2 in order to help us determine areas of consensus. From the analysis presented, a clear mandate is emerging in terms of our priorities. In addition to the team workshop data, we are in the midst of collecting the second Delphi survey responses. Our analysis of Delphi Survey 1 shows good consistency with Workshop 1 data, and our next step is to examine how the Delphi experts rank the 20 gaps before moving into consensus seeking with them. We are building towards the roundtables at the end of the year, where we will focus on our third research question: how should the next stage of research be designed? Prior to this, we will work through a verification process, sharing drafts of the white paper and seeking feedback to refine this document for use at the roundtables. The management team is always here to help. We look forward to discussing the findings with you and working together as we move forward towards the roundtables.
All right. So are there any initial thoughts, just having run through that?
Well, I will say your video was done very well. I know it's hard to listen to yourself, but you did a great job.
Thank you. I know it's something, it's no matter how much you teach, you think, oh, it's always a little bit cringeworthy when you listen back to something and it's your own voice, but that's okay. The main thing is that it needs to be informative for all of you. Is there anything that surprised you in it?
Perhaps if I'm allowed to make a comment, I shouldn't.
Yeah, go for it, Wes.
But to me, it's the surprising consistency across the data over the whole project. Here we are well into it now, into another aspect of it, and yet still the same basic issues are coming up.
Yeah, it was something that I think has surprised me as well, in terms of, as we said, that we've got that sort of consensus happening across the sectors and geographies, and actually quite a high degree of consistency between the first workshop and the second workshop, which is interesting to us because in the first workshop we asked those really broad questions about just what do you think the gaps are, and the purpose of that was to try and create that 20 research gaps document. And yet when we came to ranking the gaps in workshop 2, there was sort of quite a good degree of consistency with what was coming out more frequently in workshop 1 as well. So there is a clear mandate there. That's something that I didn't expect to find so quickly.
Yeah, I think that was a bit of a pleasant surprise to me, was that the consistency, because I was worried that we might get this all over the place. And maybe each sector having a stronger focus, and then where would we go, what would we do, and how would we handle that? So I was really happy to see the outcome of what you shared today.
So you said that you equally weighted education, academia, and industry, and I'm not surprised to see that education, at least from the US perspective, ranked just typical academic learning outcomes as their number one. And I'm just curious, will these always remain kind of equally weighted, or is there priority given to those that are actually the users that are living and would be, I guess, actually using this research?
Yeah, it's a really
interesting perspective. Yeah. Just the whole assessment, the environment changed the evaluations. Okay, and the evaluation needs to be valid and reliable to the societal's needs. So we talk about skills. Well, what skills, what competencies, and after that we're talking about the learning outcome. Well, which outcome you should have, right? So there's a mismatch of understanding. So we're faced with like a double challenge. Is the essential of the 3 R's. So we need more education there, and we have a better education to develop the competencies that rated at the same speed of the societies. How does it work? So the evolution of the industry is going faster than our evolution there, just by the context. So the assessment, we got a huge debate here in my little neck of the world here in New Brunswick, is that how do you be accountable about the evaluation process and have that environment is aligned with the skills needed by learning experience. We have a lot of data about the teacher's experience, right? Okay, but how do we make sure this? And we're actually investigating the whole leadership aspect of that now. So this whole personalizing, we talk about personalized learning. What about personalizing teaching? What about personalizing leadership? How do you respond to the local and global economy by skill required? It's interesting. So it's fun. Thank you for sharing those data there. It's very interesting.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, no, it's a really interesting debate to sort of get into in terms of where we go and what priorities are. I think at the moment, sort of, we were keen to equally weight because we've got different groups in each of these workshops, and so making sure that there was that sort of equal voice. But that, I think, Mario, what you're talking about, that tension sort of between also like what's localized and then what happens at that broader systemic level. That's certainly something that's coming out for us, and I'm interested because workshop 1 sort of had much more of a focus around school systems, and that wasn't quite as evident in the workshop 2 rankings. In fact, that's actually quite low in terms of priority at the moment, but I do think it's certainly a challenge for us in terms of how we design research to make sure that, as you said, Rachel, end users, we're meeting those needs, but we're also meeting those needs across all of the sectors, and we're doing it at levels that takes into account local, contextually specific issues, as well as making sure that we don't just end up with these isolated research projects, that we do have something that comes back together and has the ability to be impactful on a much broader scale. Yeah, it's a tricky thing. It's a problem for the roundtables.
Just something that caught my attention, if I may say something. Looking at the top 5 ranking by sectors, right? In the industry sector, they mentioned the impact on the student engagement, whereas in the academic sector, I couldn't find it there. How come?
It was a bit lower for the academics, and I think I share my screen again, and I zoom.
I couldn't find it there.
Into here for academics, it was actually 8, so it's not as high on the priority list for academics as it was for the other 2, and this is something that's we found to be quite common in terms of when we were going through creating the overall list, is that often 2 of the sectors rank a gap a bit more highly than the third. So student engagement is actually the key one, because you can see the range on the right hand side of 33. There was quite a significant variance in terms of how people were ranking that, and yet overall it still is important for us as an overarching gap. So this is part of I think the challenge of working through the sectors is seeing sort of where those differences lie and narrowing down really what is critical. But one of the things I think we've noticed is that student engagement is one of those gaps that also crosses other gaps. So once the students are engaged, then that has an impact on their learning outcomes, and then that's going to have an impact on their health and well-being. And so that's another ongoing issue for us, is that in that sort of complexity that is the school learning environment, figuring out how these factors actually relate to each other. And realizing that they will probably be drawn into this study because there's that overlap with other things as well.
And Julia, I wonder if people are interested or find of interest the fact that teaching has basically disappeared off the list. It only just made it into educators, and other than that, it disappeared. Did we do too good a job with ILETC in looking at teachers? That not now mean we don't have to research them anymore?
You're just fishing for a compliment there.
Was it obvious?
Yeah, but to add to that, this is a very important element you just mentioned there, Wes, because when we change the context and say the classroom to innovative learning environment, there's so many variables. And what we have is like we have students that used to listen, right? Okay, now they're active, right? Okay, well, let's define active, right? Okay, and how to make sure that their student experience. And what we're realizing is that the pedagogically, like, the lesson plans needs to reflect that the teacher's role, the student roles, and the leadership role has changed in this innovative learning environment. We're seeing that there, interestingly. So we're seeing that student is a state of mind of creating and validating and reflecting, which completely changed the role of the teacher, because the teacher used to be in front of the class. They're not in front of the class, but what's my role? How do I formally assess? How can I provide instant feedback by feed-forward feedback while that the student is accountable for learning by merging the outcome and the competencies desired, which completely changed the mindset of the role of the school principals, leadership, in how they personalize intervention with their teachers in those innovative environment in their new role. So I think that this innovative learning environment create a brand new or a paradigm shift of what's learning is all about by mindset, but also a new structure, a collaborative structure, all right, that stimulate relationship and connections and merging the relationship between student, teachers, and principal in their role of learning. And that's got direct impact on the system engagement. So I'm very intrigued there about, why. And as I think it was Lisanne who was speaking, or I can't. Oh, Luciana. Yeah, Luciana. It's like, yeah, because there's like the post-secondary institution in the M12, they have an interesting conversation about that. And yeah, singing and singing in the same rhythm of the song on the dance floor. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun conversation. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Mario. Rachel, you had your hand up as well.
Well, just building on that, because I know you had also mentioned offhand that like systems and structures of the school was also prominent in workshop 1, but didn't come out in the rankings. And I don't know if teaching is in the same, but in my brain, like when I was thinking through the rankings of priorities, it was very much kind of the student outcomes that we're trying to understand and link to. And I do think of the systems and supports and the teaching of these supporting variables that are going to impact, so mediator, moderator, what have you. So I do wonder, and I don't know how to figure out within your process, is there a way of understanding, like, if that's not your main research goal, what role should it actually play though in the research process in terms of being a variable that we measure, because we do know that it should have an impact.
Yeah, no, I think that's I don't think I've got an answer yet. Again, hopefully that's where we spend our next few months. But I think it's a really interesting observation to make, that lots of these gaps that are coming up are more outcomes focused, and again, whatever we do to measure is going to have to consider everything that's intervening in that space. And I think that's part of the reason, and possibly a cop-out as well on Wes and my behalf, that we called this about student experience, but the aim of that was really to be as holistic as we could in thinking about how students do experience school, and that's going to look different for every child, and that we didn't want to sort of just put that that one blanket statement on that we want to know about outcomes. So yeah, it's a good problem, I think, that we have.
Yeah, I think all of these have quite a few variables that we have to consider as to how the work goes forward, but that's a good problem to have.
I also had another. Oh, go ahead.
I was thinking that they all match. I mean, the industry, they are thinking about how to provide like good education. So it's the same word, but in different perspectives. I mean, hybrid learning is something that we definitely should be thinking about, but industry is thinking because they have to give this support, and like education is just concerned about providing the student engagement or evaluation of learning environments. So I really think that they are all intersecting.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Lisanne. It's someone made the comment, I think it was actually in our European regional Zoom, that design rated much lower for educators than it did for academics and industry, and they made the comment, is that because people are sort of responding to these top 5 in terms of where they feel that they have control over what it is that they do, and that that then this might lead to sort of these complementary sets of top 5s, because we are taking that cross-sector approach. And yeah, I think that's really interesting.
I was wondering something that I've always felt was curious, and this links a little back, Wes, to your joke about did we do just such a good job on the ILETC? Well, the study before that was on evaluating 21st century learning environments. And so I'm just curious, the goal of that research compared to the gap listed in the top priority here of evaluating learning environments. What's that relationship and dynamic there, if any?
Well, that's a perfect thing for you to answer.
The evaluation of learning environments, material and data was, I suppose for us anyway, it was a threshold we crossed and moved into a whole new realm, because it opened the door to the fact that we can actually assess and get ratings and get measurements around a whole bunch of very sort of ephemeral data, stuff that's changing all of the time. So if you look at the 3 critical PhDs that were done within that, each of those in some ways have laid a foundation for what we're doing today. So there's that direct link. The E21LE project didn't come up with any specific, oh, this is the way we must evaluate, or these are the issues we must evaluate. But it certainly came up with, can we evaluate? Is it possible to do that? So I'd see that as the strongest link. Does that answer what you're asking?
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure where the question would lead. So I just know that the language of the two are the same. So I wanted to know if this was a next step or showed more gaps. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the 3 PhDs in the E21LE, one was about the spatial designers and the educator designers, and how do they use evaluation when they're working with schools. That was Anna Salo Oviedo's PhD, which was never completed, unfortunately. She got very ill. The other 2, though, was Oliver's study into how do we rank the issues that we need to look at and how do we put those into place. And the third was Terry Byers' work around evaluation learning environments. And both of those PhDs were quite influential. So, yeah, it is interesting because I haven't been asked that before, Rachel, but you're right. You know, it's interesting to reflect back on that and say it is part of the journey to reach where we are now. And I think, Julia, it's interesting we talk about this, don't we, a bit about these rankings that you've got on the screen at the moment. You know, the reality is they do cover that notion of well-being, of learning outcomes and evaluation. You know, they sort of, they're the 3 sort of themes that run through it. And of that, 2 of them are what you might call measurable, you know, getting student learning outcomes and looking at evaluation of spaces, their impact. And then the third one is a very affective outcome about, you know, about engagement and well-being. So I'm reassured by all of this because it shows that actually what people want and what people see as the gaps and what people want to know more about isn't just straight evaluation. It's much more about, well, okay, then what's the impact then on students and how students, you know, live within these spaces now.
Yeah, and it directly align about also the design of the lesson plan that have impact on those skills. It's interesting we're talking about that, and I don't know if I could say well about this, but you know, it seems to be that, you know, the education system is going through a very pressured, right? Because there's a significant mismatch. And we have a lot of, you know, information about that. But what are the forces, like, you know, that can leapfrog the system? And it seems to be like 3 forces. The first forces is the learning environment, but the learning environment initiate the second forces, which is the learning and teaching processes, while being accountable. And the third one is that the fact that the learning process is active, dynamic, provide deep learning experience. How do you assess the third forces, which is the competencies and the outcome? And it's kind of dive into one to another, right? To do this. So force 1 create this, force 2 create this, force 3 create this. Now, how do you measure that journey from a student experience point of view? But definitely have a systemic engagement for sure, because teachers seem to be more engaged, principals seem to be more engaged, parents seem to be more engaged about that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Mario. And of course, you've got that time factor that comes in with it. And that, you know, across that journey, things are always going to be shifting and changing. And
I'll tell you a story. It's so funny because the research we're currently doing is we're completely redesigning high school, and you're not even called high school. It's going to be innovative community learning, innovative community innovation center, right? Respond to the community. So we're transforming the whole pedagogy. And what we have realized is that we say, okay, well, let's do phase one, right? Phase one, take all high school, one grade 9, one grade 10, one grade 11, one grade 12 as a mindset, right? Okay, this. And through our journey right now is that the teachers have decided to merge the subject and the grades all together now. So we are in year 2, and now we've got one grade 9, 10 class together. And year 3, you're going to have 9, 10, 11 together. It's hard to describe this whole inclusion, systemic inclusion by amalgamating the subject, the teachers, the students, and all the teachers as a group is becoming a resources to all the students. So it's kind of interesting. So we see now grade 9, grade 11 teachers teaching to grade 9 students and vice versa. Hard to explain.
Yeah, but exciting and really lovely when you can see that responsiveness to sort of student needs as well, and that there's there's space to work beyond. I think there's I noticed that particularly. I know this Zoom is much more about workshop 2 data, but it was something that I think came out more in workshop 1 was people's sort of aspirational comments around changing the system, and sort of think that's probably one of the reasons why evaluation sits so highly here in the workshop 2 data is sort of understanding really clearly where we're at now to then start pushing that mandate for what education could look like and what these spaces can do for students. So that's quite lovely to see as well. Is there anything else from your own sort of sector backgrounds in terms of looking at where the top 5 has come that surprises you? Because we've got quite a nice cross section in this Zoom.
I'm surprised inclusion is not one of the top 5. At least it's just, and I know it was on one of the slides that you've shown today, so it did make its way.
Yeah, it's in the top 5 for the educators, but I think it's number 6 overall. I'm pretty sure it's number 6 or 6 or 7 overall, and really, really close. And it's one of the things that where we're starting to see that where the overlaps are in that 20 research gaps document. So one of the really nice things about working through the workshop 2 data is that not only do we have this sort of quantifiable data in terms of what made it into the top 5 cluster or the bottom 5 cluster, but we got you to write those comments around giving reasons for why that particular gap made it in. And we're noticing in that there's actually a lot of overlap between health and wellbeing and inclusion, in terms of people just talking really holistically about how does the learning environment cater for diverse learners and make sure that everyone actually feels healthy and safe and can thrive within a context. So I'm thinking maybe that overlap between those 2 gaps will get essentially sort of split that vote, and has led to inclusion not being in the top 5, because it still is a really strong theme. It also is quite a strong theme when people comment around the design of ILESE. It's about designing for inclusiveness. So it's certainly there within the mandate.
And one of the things we found interesting doing the analysis also was, and this is a very untechnical term, and Julie's never heard me say it before, so she'll look a bit shocked, but the data is sort of represented almost like an hourglass, in that the top ones were consistent, well represented. Then as we got to the middle set of the list of 20 research gaps, they're all over the place. And then when you get to the bottom, it becomes consistent again. Like for instance, COVID was without any doubt 100% everybody's least wanted thing to talk about or to study or to look at, or in fact of importance. So we sort of had lots that were really well represented, and then down in that middle section there, they were sort of all over the place. And then they went back out again to being really consistent. So there we go, Julia, the hourglass representation of data. Yeah.
It will go in the white paper.
You heard it. Yeah. But it is interesting because it shows that there's a whole bunch of issues there that the first workshop said, based on the number of times people spoke about these issues, they obviously rate as being issues. And yet when we do the rankings, they slip into that middle section where we said, look, they're important, they're not that important. Yeah.
And I think this is where the workshop 2 data is really helping us to refine thinking, because as we said, everything that sort of came into workshop 1 it might have been cited, but that could have been, you know, for example, yeah, COVID came up, but it was because people were probably saying we don't want it rather than we do want it. And so workshop 2's really helped us to sort of pick out those buckets of what are people saying they really want and what are the things that actually aren't key for us at the moment. And I really liked being able to sort of compare those two questions as well, because to go back to your hourglass, Wes, the things that are sort of sitting at the bottom that people don't really, you know, aren't priorities for us at the moment are the things that basically got 0 citations in the first question and vice versa. So it gave us that degree of confidence that actually the data we're getting are really reliable in terms of what people see as priorities.
What were a couple of the other bottom ones, Julia?
Yeah, thanks for putting me on the spot with that. Look, the school systems
Right.
is one that, because I was actually quite surprised to see it lower, that people were more interested in sort of getting that local contextual information rather than working at that systemic level. As well as, which hurts me as a high school or an ex-high school teacher, but it was the subject discipline one. People said they, I think, yeah, I'm not too sure. I need to go back through the qualitative comments around that to figure out why that's in the bottom 5. But yeah, that wasn't as important this time around. As well as things like technology. I think people are basically saying, you know, technology is fairly ubiquitous now, and so that's not as key. And again, it was, if it comes in, it tends to be more within this overarching like design of ILE type theme rather than a separate theme of its own. Yeah, they're the ones off the top of my head that I can remember.
No, that sounds familiar. Yeah, that's good.
And I remember that this evaluation of learning environments category, it was broader. So it involves lots of, it's a broad category. So I think it gets some of other elements than other ones that are more straight.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think things like, you talked about inclusivity before, but I think a lot of people would see inclusivity built into student engagement and built into health and wellbeing, so that they are represented. Yeah.
Is there anything about these gaps that we sort of haven't spoken about that we feel we need to touch base on tonight? We will make this video available. It's our aim to put it back up on the website as well, so that you can have a little bit more time to sit and work through it, because again, we know it's hard going. We appreciate all of the feedback on it so far when you've only had a chance to watch it once.
I'm sort of thinking ahead a little bit to what research we're going to design out of it, Julia. And be interesting, wouldn't it, to hear what people think, what research should we do based on these sorts of data?
Yeah, absolutely.
You raised a good point there, Wes. The key is to make sure, like, you know, the fundamental challenges is that we need to prepare our student for the future, which was not clear about, you know, the skills they need, you know, in terms of, you know, the competencies they need to be required. And we know that AI kind of gave us kind of a new wrench into the mix of how that the industry is requiring. The common denominator is creativity is really the things, right? So this whole learning environment needs stimulating creativity to solve conflict challenge, but collectively problem of kind of the local world or the world. So what's the experience look like? So innovative organizations going through a process of looking about their dynamic data and figure out the trends of their data, so they stimulate question to do some experiment, and they convey their data. And after they convey the data, well, you know, they're integrate that collaboratively so they can start reflecting. It seems to be like that's just the pattern, and those are just the foundation of the formal management of the innovative process. What we're seeing is that constantly organizations are innovating and evaluating and reflecting, all right, this in context, missions, and expectations. So every morning in the industry, you know, it seems like, and I'm not a business person, I'm not in the industry at all, But every morning seems to be that the organization are effective and efficient, and they're looking at that dynamic data and react spontaneously through this process, which stimulate the innovation. So how do you, inspired of that work, and put that as a student experience, you know, and how do you design this learning experience, and how do you want to be able to assess it? Like, it seems to be that the context, mission, and expectation on a daily basis need to be somewhat anchored into the student experience to develop the competency. Looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
I'm sorry. I think that one challenge is that it's hard to get the student's voice, because when I did research on learning environments, with higher education students, and I could listen to them. So, and with kids, these ethical issues, I think this is the greatest challenge to see how we can get the students' voice somehow, because sometimes they are even, because the whole study is about student experience, right? And I guess that it will be a challenge to somehow listen to their voice.
And also, I think that, for example, to cater for what Dr. Maria was saying about the future careers, that we don't know exactly what they're gonna properly work in the future. One of the things that we should really, also take into account is how to develop their social emotional skills, right? Because once they are, in a way, they understand themselves. They have this ability to be flexible, the adaptability as well. So, and also the resilience is also important. So it's a way to, help them cope for future doubts.
Yeah, and those issues are very strongly reflected in point 2 there, the effective learning outcomes, and point 4, engagement. And I think the student voice is a really good question, because I have personally, issues, I think, with the way that we do bring student voice into our research. I think it's hard to get authentic student voice. You do get students commenting on stuff within sort of an adult sort of atmosphere. But actually, how do kids talk to each other about spaces and how they learn and do things like that? And trying to get that authentic voice, I think, is a challenge. And yet we have to do it, I agree, in the next study coming up. Somehow we can't talk about student experiences in these spaces without actually, getting the children themselves involved in that conversation. Yeah.
I can weigh in if you guys want to. We're actually doing that since 2019, is gathering the student experience of that. So what we do found out, and this is very preliminary, we just beta testing our data collection quantitative process, but there's a strong relationship between the student role and the teacher's role to create that. And I'll share the screen. I'll send the image there to us, and if it's valid to share. But we just published that at ERI this June. What in this innovative student environment, we are seeing strong indicators that that's student defining active pedagogies or active learning. They are in a state of mind, like I was said previously, that here's the context. You need to create something. And after that, and by creating and using all your designing skills to complete the final task, which is the expectation, either you do a publication or a presentation or a product whatsoever, and is going through a validation process through research, consultation, experimentation, and prototyping, like this. And there's a reflecting, and they're reflecting on their learning ongoing. So they're always reasoning by computing, the computational thinking skill in action while the developing deep learning process. We kind of know how they experience that as a very beginning. It's definitely engaging for the students, right? Okay, and they have a sense that students develop the autonomy because they got choice. Okay, so they're allowed to make decision into the learning process. And when they learn decision, they develop confidence. And when they develop confidence, they can manage their learning. And philosophically, the role of the school is to develop independency, not dependency, right? So this whole environment thing to allowing, say, oh, I can make my own decision. I'm responsible. I'm building my confidence because I'm not taking a risk. I'm experimenting. And this is part of my learning, and the surrounding resources all around, analog, digital, and human resource, are assets to my learning experience. So that create very an inclusive context. So inclusion is yet to be defined because not clear to many people, because inclusion is more learning disabilities, but including environments, so it's a different story, right? Okay, the whole notion of building confidence and autonomy in a personalized way. So personalization is a huge, it has been mentioned a lot about, oh, I can personalize my learning. How do I craft that? Right? Oh, I can personalize my teaching. Oh, how do I craft that? How can I co-teach? How can I co-assess? So yeah, it's all linked to the student experience.
And Julie, I just sent you an forwarded Mario's email with that figure in it.
Wonderful, thank you.
It looks yeah, Mario, it looks great. It's a really nice little model you've got going there with active learning, active teaching, and right at the centre you've got inclusivity, autonomy, confidence, personalisation. So yeah, we need to. That's the depth that which we have to do across an international project. So it's a great model. Yeah.
I'll give you the other. That's going to be our next publication, but from a leadership perspective and the triangulation about leadership. Well, an active leader, what does it mean? An active teacher, what does it mean? And an active co-teacher, what does it mean? Then an active student and co-active students as a community.
Yeah, well, that's exciting. It's always yeah, it's really good to sort of know the theories that are out there at the moment. I think this is another thing why I think this project's so important, is just being able to bring together all of these different people and to understand sort of the work that's happening in different spaces, and how we can build on it. I think there'd be no one in this study, I think, who would argue that we shouldn't be moving towards that term of active learner a bit more, cohesively as a group, in terms of making sure that students are actually using these spaces and using them effectively.
And we have some research higher degree students working sort of in this field as well, Mario. So we need to put you in touch. One is on screen at the moment, Kelly. Kelly's looking at the whole notion of personalised learning, and we have a master's student who is applying for a PhD in the next project around this whole notion of student agency and student voice. So yeah.
Lovely. We got a huge sandbox, that we can do some research in it, because we're completely transforming the mindset, the structure of the culture of the learning experience within the community. So yeah, the visioning planning process of that is quite interesting. Yet to be defined and designed, but it's fun.
That's wonderful. All right, so if we're all happy, shall I just move on to sort of our next steps and where we're going from here, because it is it's going to be a fairly busy end to the year, I think, but again, a good one. So I'll just flip over to a different screen. So you might remember this from a few newsletters ago, and please, let Kelly and myself know if you're not getting them or anyone in your team isn't getting the newsletter. So the first top report in the green, we have released that. That's the one that's out on the website at the moment around workshop 1 and what we found from that stage. At the moment, we're working through exactly what was in the video that we shared tonight, and we'll be putting out a minor report around these 20 gaps and what's made it into sort of the top 5, hopefully releasing that within the next few weeks. But we also just wanted to remind you that we are running the Delphi survey in parallel to the team workshops. So far we've found that from their first survey, things are very, very consistent with what the team workshops have been saying. They're about to be cut off from their second survey. We just left it open a little bit into September, knowing that lots of our good old Northern Hemisphere experts were just returning from holidays, and we wanted to give them the best opportunity to actually respond to the second survey. So they've been doing exactly the same thing that you have been doing in the teams. They've been asked the same questions in terms of ranking their top 5 and bottom 5 and giving reasons. So we'll have really nice comparable data. And what we're doing with Adelphi is actually writing it up as that sort of separate sub-study to this whole project. So we're hoping that we won't need too many rounds of consensus. That might be Delphi 3 or Delphi 4, just to make sure that each of those panels have a consensus around their top 5. And then we'll release that as a minor report as well. But we're pulling together all of these different things that we're doing into the white paper content. And we'll be drafting that and sending that around to you in the teams, and workshopping that at the roundtables, and then again refining that into the final white paper that we'll release early next year. What this means for you in teams, let me just figure out whether I've dropped this slide in before or after. Here we go. Is that, you know, we're a little bit behind where we expected to be at this point in time. But you know, not too far. I don't think Wes and I are panicking just yet. We're doing a lot of work within the management team at the moment. So all of these blue bars that are running along the top here, we've been, you know, as you can see, stuck into analysis, stuck into Delphi analysis, and working on getting that white paper content together for everyone. We will have a workshop 3 period. And we just wanted to sort of get that out to you now as sort of team leaders to organise your teams. It's not going to be a formal workshop like the last 2, but it will be an opportunity for us to share with you the information from the white paper and have the ability to talk it through as a team, knowing that there will be at least one representative from your team at each of the roundtables, and more if you would like. But knowing that representative could be fairly confident that they've spoken to their team and can represent their team's voice when they come to the roundtables in November. So that's where we're sort of heading throughout the rest of the year. We'll keep popping out newsletters along the way, and we've got our last cafe session coming up. So it's a busy time, but that's roughly where we're going with things, and hopefully we'll start to go through that verification process towards the roundtables and getting a white paper together that's going to answer all of the questions that we have currently.
The roundtable session is going to be a really important one, because at that stage we would have refined this data down to the stage we will be making an active suggestion or presentation to you about, this is the research that's come from it, this is the potential research, and how do we put it into place? You know, how will we actually make it happen will be sort of a big focus of that roundtable. So we're certainly looking forward to having you all here in Melbourne. It's thrilling that each team's going to be represented, and some with more than one person. I know it's a long way to come. I think, Lizzie-Anne, you've got a 40-hour flight to get here. So, yeah, congratulations to you. You might get that prize when you get here. Yeah, but that roundtable is going to be really good, and we will actually finish up with a final regional Zoom sort of about March next year, where we'll do the wrap up of this part of the project, and hopefully by then we'll have a pretty good idea of whether a major project is going to come out of it. And you know, Julie and I are feeling at the moment that it's likely to be a 2-tier project that we put into the white paper. 2 tiers in both ways, actually. One is that there'll be a band, we think anyway, of the research that will go right across the different regions. And we've got a bit of an idea what that will involve, but we'll wait until more data comes in. And the second thing is we'll end up with probably 2 or 3 hubs, which will do much greater in-depth projects through things like Mario Shirk or something like that, Australia and ARC, etc. So that's the general plan at the moment, Julia, isn't it?
Yep, that is the plan. Yep, more on that to come as we refine.
Well, we have to get you out of the wardrobe first to be able to do that.
We have to get me out of the wardrobe.
Oh, this is fun. It's exciting. Looking forward to the next step, and definitely going to be a learning journey for sure.
Yeah. Thank
all of you guys
all
going
so
in
much.
Melbourne? Is that what I'm reading? Is that what I'm understanding? All of us here?
A good number of people here. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Okay, Wes, you got the first round.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll have time to have any celebration drinks or anything. We should do, but it's going to be a really full week, so it's going to be exciting. Yeah, with the three. We're hoping people can stay for all three events. Coming the distance you guys are, it's pretty logical that you would. The talking spaces, the final 2 days, is looking particularly exciting. Lots of interesting stuff coming in with that. So yeah, should be a good week.
Great.
Be nice to finally have events to go to and to host.
That's right.
Really see people face to face. How novel.
That's correct. That's great.
Yeah.
Right
Well,
on.
thank you all for joining us and for the conversation. It's been really, really useful to get your feedback and thoughts about where we're going, and we're looking forward to, as Wes said, building on this when we get to the roundtables as well.
Thank you. This is great.
Yeah, thank you, Julia.
Our pleasure.